Hello, Fannin. It's been great seeing some of you guys these last few weeks. Let's talk briefly about a disciple. In order to understand the word disciple in the New Testament, we must first understand that Jesus was a Jewish rabbi or teacher. And like other rabbis of his time, he had disciples. The word disciple is mathetes in the Greek, and it appears 269 times. While the New Testament was, of course, written in Greek, Jesus and his contemporaries spoke Hebrew and Aramaic, and they would have called them Talmudim, a Hebrew word that was defined in part by the culture that revolved around the learning of, discussion of, and reverence for the Torah. And the Greek word mathetes comes from the word menthano, to learn, from a root math indicating thought accompanied by endeavor. I like that phrase, thought accompanied by endeavor. This was the type of learning that Talmudim did. The rabbi would live out application of the scripture in front of them, and their knowledge was immediately put into action. So often, our own discipleship seems to lean heavily on thought and less on endeavor. But the two were inextricably linked in Jesus' culture. Jewish children were taught from the ages 5 or 6 from the Torah. The most talented students will continue to study the Torah, often memorizing the entire scriptures in what was known as Beth Midrash. From there, here's an explanation of that by a pastor. Very few, of the most outstanding Beth Midrash students sought permission to study with the famous rabbi, often leaving home to travel with him for a lengthy period of time. And these students were called Talmidim, or Talmud for singular, in Hebrew, which is translated as disciple. There is much more to a Talmud than what we call student. A student wants to know what the teacher knows for the grade, to complete the class or the degree, or even out of respect for the teacher. But a Talmud wants to be like the teacher. That is to become what the teacher is. That meant that students were passionately devoted to their rabbi and noted everything he did or said. And this meant that the rabbi Talmud relationship was a very intense and personal system of education. So as the rabbi lived and taught his understanding of the scriptures, his students, the Talmudim, listened and watched and imitated so as to become like him. And eventually they would become teachers, passing on a lifestyle to their own Talmudim. And authors Anne Spangler and Louis Verberg, I probably butchered that, provide great insight into the Jewishness of Jesus in their book, Sitting at the Feet of Rabbi Jesus. They say this: along with instructing the crowds, a rabbi's greatest goal was to raise up disciples who would carry on his teaching. As important as knowledge of Scripture was, there was one thing more important: a rabbi's moral character. The mission of a rabbi was to become a living example of what it means to apply God's words to one's life. End quote. So the New Testament mentions not just Jesus' disciples, but also the disciples of John, disciples of Moses, and even the Pharisees. The term is used not just to refer to the 12 apostles, but to the large group of men and women who followed Jesus. Jesus himself uses the word only a handful of times. In John 8:31, we read, "To the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, 'If you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples.'" In John 13:34 and 35, Jesus says this: "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." And likewise, in his famous teaching in John 15 about the vine and the branches, the central point is that the mark of a disciple is a life that bears the fruit of love. So just as our rabbi went to great extremes to show us the extent of his love, so should we love others. So as his disciples, we want not just to know what he knows, but to live as he lived. In other words, thought accompanied by endeavor. It is what we are called to as disciples of Rabbi Jesus. Have a great day.